Hello, everybody. Week 5. It's hard to believe that it's already been it's been 6 whole weeks since we've seen each other. Such an unfortunate turn of events, but it is our new norm, for lack of a better phrase. As all of you now know, hopefully, we're not going to see each other again this year, this school year. The school year has been canceled, which is incredibly unfortunate because we had such a great year before all of this happened. So I encourage all of you to keep doing your work, keep doing a good job, get your work done on time, and you'll be just fine. Enjoy your summer, and then make sure you say hi to me next year um, when you're seniors, which is hopefully you'll be seniors if you do your work. But today we're going to be talking about the executive branch. Last week we did the legislative. Next week we'll do the judicial. All of you should be able to, once again, be able to probably take the quiz without even going through the lesson. But I want you to go through the lesson. That's because we spend so much time in class going over the intricacies and the details of each branch. So hopefully my screen shares, it hasn't been one to share the past couple weeks. So let's see what it does. Let's do this and see what happens. All right, so we will go to the executive branch. People. All right, so bear with me as we go through this. So your objective for the week is to examine structures, be able to describe the structures and powers of the executive branch in your own words. That's the key, because if you can say it in your own words, that means you understand it, most likely. As you can see, President Obama's right here, front and center. But I'm going to do a quick overview of this, talk about the key points, talk about the key amendments involved with the presidency, and we will get right through this. All right, so right here, this slide talks about the terms and qualifications. The Constitution is pretty vague as to all of the terms and qualifications. Up until the 22nd Amendment, there was no presidential term limit. George Washington stepped down after 2, which was his example that he wanted to set. That worked all the way up until FDR, which is pictured here on the right on slide 5. FDR had 4 total terms, and he would have probably served more if he would have lived longer. So in 1955, the 22nd Amendment was passed, limiting the presidency to 2 full terms, which means 4 years, right? But presidents can serve a total of 10, but that gets weird if a president dies and a vice president takes over, stuff like that. So the qualifications for a president, you can never be an immigrant. So for senators or representatives, you can be an immigrant, and eventually after becoming a citizen, you can be a political figure. However, presidents always have to be natural born. You've had to live in the United States for the past 14 years. So that means you couldn't have lived in Europe or South America or Asia or anywhere for any years in between. You had to live 14 consecutive years in the United States. You have to be at least 35 years old. So those are the major. There aren't any, like, you don't have to have a certain college degree. You don't have to have a certain amount of political experience. Yes, certainly those can help. If you're a political science major or a law major, if you were a lawyer, if you were a senator, representative, all that would help, right? We want very experienced presidents. And if you aren't involved in politics in any way before you're president, you're sometimes not considered as experienced. It doesn't mean you aren't, but you can be thought of as that. It's a little question for you. Hopefully you know that. The Electoral College. We talked a lot about the Electoral College. This is what elects the president, but the Electoral College is based upon the popular vote. So the popular vote and the Electoral College matter. So basically, each state has their Electoral College number vote is based on the total amount of state representatives which serve in the House of Representatives, and that is based on a state's population. Bigger states have more representatives than smaller states. And then the senators. Every state has the same amount of senators, which is 2. So with Ohio, we have 15. No, what do we have? Before the census comes out, we have 16 representatives in the House. in the United States House and the 2 senators, we have 18 Electoral College votes. California, on the other hand, they have 55 total, which means 53 representatives, 2 senators. In Montana, just for a size comparison, Montana has 3 total Electoral College votes. 2 of those come from the senators and 1 from the representative. That's because they do not have a lot of people living up in Montana. It's not a very populous state. Remember, on slide 8, it talks about kind of more history behind the Electoral College. Remember, you cannot get the Electoral College vote for a state unless you win the popular vote for the state. And I believe on slide 7, it talks about how Maine, and that might be on 8, Maine and Nebraska, where's that at? I don't know. Or anyways, Maine and Nebraska don't follow that method, but we don't live there. So if a candidate wins the popular vote for Ohio, they will get all of Ohio's 18 Electoral College votes. That's how it works in 48 of the 50 states. Alrighty. And remember that magic number that we talked about, the magic number to win the presidency. You have to win the presidential candidate has to win at least 270 Electoral College votes to be able to take office. Alrighty, so the Electoral College became, it changed and it had to become a thing really because of the election of 1800, which we talked about in class. Jefferson and Aaron Burr later killed Alexander Hamilton, they were from the same party, the Democratic Republicans, and they received the same exact number of electoral votes. Therefore, we know if there's a tie in the presidential election, it goes to the House of Representatives. That's still the same today. And basically, whatever party controls the House, that president will win out. However, they were both from the same party, which was an issue. So it took 36 rounds of voting in the House to elect Thomas Jefferson as president. Aaron Burr was never president. He might have been if he wouldn't have shot Alexander Hamilton. But we found that, basically, it basically laid the way or laid the foundation for the 12th Amendment, right? Which it says right down here, that the president and vice president are a package deal, right? You don't want Aaron Burr coming in as vice president because he hates Thomas Jefferson. He just beat him. So today, a president will announce their vice president running mate that they will run with together. If they win, if that president wins, the vice president automatically goes with them. It's not the second place finisher, which was what happened before the Electoral College as we have it today. I can't imagine what life would be like with Trump as president and Hillary Clinton as vice president. I don't think we'd get a lot done. Not to say we wouldn't get anything done, but I don't think we'd get that much done. Alrighty, so let's move on. Oh, that's where it's Maine and Nebraska right here. Duh. So basically, like I said, this lays out, this was the 2000 election, so we've lost representatives since then. Like I said, we have 18, California gained 1, Montana has 3. So, yeah, I already explained that. Hopefully you remember that from class. All right, presidential succession. Who remembers what amendment this is? It is the 25th Amendment. Congrats to anybody who got that right. Remember, JFK's head exploding. JFK 25, his head was in 25 pieces. So JFK's assassination really made the point that that amendment had to be made a clear succession process, or a determined list of people that would take office after the president was killed or could hold office had to be established. There wasn't any real clear precedent from the beginning. And William Henry Harrison died in 1841. He was the first president to die in office. So all the way up until 1967, when the 25th Amendment was passed because of JFK's assassination, that was really when solidified rules were set into place. As you remember, JFK died in 1963, but it took a couple of years to get that put into effect. President LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson is here. He's shown taking the oath of office on the presidential Air Force One, the presidential jet, in Dallas. This is JFK's body has just been loaded onto the plane. As you can see Jackie Kennedy right here next to LBJ. She's still wearing, this is the pink dress that she has on, but it's blood stained. And she was asked if she wanted to change before this. And she said, no, I want them to see what they did to my husband. So very strong woman, but in a very unfortunate situation. But this is a picture that will last a long time in our history. This is why we have the 25th Amendment. This just goes on a little bit more about the 1967 Amendment, the 25th Amendment. The presidential succession list of, like the president, vice president, speaker of the House, the president pro tempore of the Senate. That was established in 1947, but it was officially made official with the 25th Amendment. So always remember the 25th Amendment for presidential succession. This, for those of you that don't know, on slide 13, is a picture. The video is a picture of Al Gore. Al Gore, people know about talking about climate change, but he, many people believe, won the election of 2000, right? The turn of the century. So he went against George W. Bush, which we know served 2 terms as president. He served from 2000 to 2008. Obama replaced him. The election was really the closest almost in history, right? One of the closest. It came down to the state of Florida, right? The preliminary or the early results of the election had to be recounted. And in the end, the state of Florida and their Electoral College votes, which is right here, determined the election. Many people believe that this was a rigged election, a corrupt election, because guess who the governor of Florida was in 2000? Probably all of you don't know. It was Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush is the brother of George W. Bush. So somehow the electoral votes and the election results in Florida went in or favored George Bush. That's interesting. Feel bad for Al Gore. He might have lost that election because of family ties. But anyway, many people believe George Bush did a pretty good job running the country. That's up for debate. So for this activity, it's asking you to basically explain, how did the Electoral College vote compare with the popular vote in the 2000 election? How might this illustrate an issue with the Electoral College? So it wants you to basically evaluate and analyze both sources, and then talk about or look for potential issues with the Electoral College. As we talked about in class, a lot of people have issues with the current system and the current Electoral College. So it'd be great for some of you to start brainstorming some solutions to that, so that we can fix the issues within our country. All right, roles and powers of the presidency. We talked about all of these in depth in class. I'm going to go over those one more time. All right, so the chief executive, basically, he's the head of the executive branch. The executive branch enforces and carries out the law. This picture of George W. Bush on slide 16. And he basically is the head of the entire government. All right, so that's what that slide's saying. The head of state. This is an interesting role, not one with much, I don't know. It has a lot of power, but it's a unique power. The video here is of JFK getting sworn in 1960. Or 1961, you might be able to say. But the head of state is the ceremonial leader of a nation. So ceremonial is kind of like, it's ceremony-based, not really always real or substantial powers. For example, the Queen of England is the ceremonial head of state of England. However, that office, right? The Queen has no power today. Back in the 1700s and 1800s, they did, but today it's a symbolic position. The Prime Minister and Parliament run the country, not the Queen. So basically, our president is a living symbol of our country, and they have the ability to control the behavior of Americans, the morale of Americans. Basically, they represent America. If you see the president, you just automatically think of America. No matter if you see George Bush or Obama, people abroad in other countries think about America when they see those individuals. And I've told you the story of JFK. People in different countries throughout the world had pictures of him in their homes. And when he was assassinated, it was a world event that really made many, 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 many people sad. Chief diplomat, basically, like we talked about, they go to different countries. They represent our country abroad. They represent America abroad. They have the power to receive diplomats, negotiate treaties, all of that stuff. But remember, the Senate has to approve any treaties the president negotiates. He can't, that's that check and balance again that we talked about a couple weeks ago on here. So chief diplomat basically just negotiates with different countries, represents America to the world. This video here, really, really, really good video about how, as chief diplomat, making those tough decisions really ages presidents. It shows what the presidents look like when they go into office and what they look like when they come out of office. They have a lot more gray hair when they come out of office. And it really showed JFK's decision-making during the Cuban Missile Crisis and how a tough decision it was for him. A lot of sleepless nights he had. I'm trying to make the right decision and not repeat the Bay of Pigs disaster. So this is a great video. It's worth watching. On slide 19. All right, so the commander-in-chief, we've talked about this at length in class. I hope all of you know that the president cannot declare war officially. Commander-in-chief is the other title for the president, but that does not mean they can declare war. Congress declares war, as all of you should know. The military powers are shared. Right? So Congress approves money to be used in war, right? Congress has to declare war officially, but the president can move troops around and, basically leads our country in war when we're at war. However, in 1973, because of LBJ and Nixon's actions in Vietnam, the War Powers Resolution was passed, which basically really limited the president's military authority. Or on slide 20 here, and what they can and cannot do in regard to war. So there are limits to what the president can do. They don't have all the power. But as you know, in the Middle East, we're still involved. It's called a conflict. It's not actually a war. So a lot of gray area there. Legislature or legislator in chief. This one, the two main powers that the president has in regard to legislation, which we know are laws or policies, basically is to propose legislation, right? So he can suggest it. He can try to use the State of the Union address to propose new legislation that he wants to get passed. But he also has the power to veto or shut down legislation. And the opposite of veto is signing the bill into place or the law into place, which the president does very often, like President Trump just did with the CARE Act, giving Americans basically an economic stimulus for our country to get Americans back on their feet during the pandemic. So basically, veto and propose legislation. Those are the two major roles. Now, the two major roles, I would say, there are basically three. So the three major judicial powers the president has are: one, appoint federal and Supreme Court justices. Donald Trump, a fact that I talked about in class, has appointed the most federal judges in the history of the United States. That was one of his major goals going into office. Their second major responsibility, they run the Department of Justice. We'll talk about the Department of Justice in a couple slides, but basically they pick the attorney general. The attorney general runs the Department of Justice, and the attorney general basically applies laws to the United States, and the president, talks in their ear about what they want to see happen. During JFK's term, he appointed his brother Bobby Kennedy to the attorney general, and they took a big offensive against racism, and they fought for civil rights. That was one of their major purposes and goals. And then lastly, we talked about this. The president has the power of clemency, which is a broad category talking about amnesty or pardoning or a pardon. We know pardons a get out of jail free card given to people that break the law. So the party leader, this is another picture of JFK and Nixon in the 1959-1960 presidential debates. The party leader, we know this already, that there's basically a two-party system because of money, right? The third parties have a very difficult time even getting on the stage at debates because of a lack of funds. So, we have Republican and Democrat presidents, and they are basically the most powerful. They are the most powerful person in the country. So if they're a Democrat, they're going to be the leader of the Democratic Party at that time, if they are a Democrat, let's say. So as JFK is concerned, when you have that power, you can use that to reward your political allies, those people that helped you get where you were. JFK, for example, appointed his sister's husband, his brother-in-law, Sergeant Shriver, as the head of the Peace Corps. He appointed his brother, Bobby Kennedy, as the Attorney General. So there are a bunch of ways that being party leader can be beneficial to you, your family, friends, and all of that. Some call that nepotism, others call that politics. All right, economic planning, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but we know the office of the president is in charge of guiding the country economically, which is a current event right now. That's going on, and it's something very, very crucial. So in the late 1800s, 1900s, laissez-faire economics really wasn't working out. There were a lot of people taking advantage and making a lot of money in America, which was good for those people making money, but bad for the majority of citizens. So between Teddy Roosevelt breaking those monopolies, trust busting, creating the Federal Reserve System, and then FDR with all of his New Deal programs to get America back on their feet during the Depression, and then even into the 60s with LBJ and all of his, Medicare, Medicaid, all of those programs really went on to, it showed that the president or the executive has a lot of power to shape the economic well-being of the country, which hopefully Trump's plans right now do that and don't make everything worse. Hopefully they get everybody through the situation. Executive privilege basically says that since you're president, you have privileges that other people don't have. Sometimes you can deny requests from Congress, as George Washington did. He the House of Representatives wanted Washington to turn over certain documents about a treaty. He gave that to the Senate, but not the House, because the Senate, if you remember, the Senate has to agree or ratify all treaties, not the House. The House didn't need to know any of that, but the Senate did. So George Washington denied the House request, but gave it to the Senate. So there are kind of things like that, just small little things that the president can get some power over. Talking about Nixon here. Nixon, this is a video of him on slide 28 resigning because of the Watergate scandal. But he tried to say that, none of he wasn't going to turn over any tapes to the basically judicial branch because, of his executive privilege. They said no. The Supreme Court said no, you have to follow the law. No one is above the law, not even the president, which we know about that. That's one of the principles of the Constitution. But Nixon was kind of stupid. I don't want to say stupid, but didn't really think this out. He recorded every conversation. He had all of his phones and everything in the White House recorded. So a lot of times he was saying things very, very, very inappropriate as we would see them today. And they're recorded for all of history. So not a good idea for presidents maybe to do that. OBJ also did that. The cabinet and the executive department. We've talked about this. The cabinet are those 15 individuals now as it has expanded to. Originally, it wasn't that many people, but as our government has expanded, we need more people. Those individuals are recommended by the president, but they have to be approved by Congress. Right? The Congress has to approve those recommendations. If they're not approved, they're not going to get power. All right, so the cabinet, right, today we have a total of 15 members. All right, their chief roles are to basically advise the president in what to do, about what to do. All right. And on this next page, their second main responsibility, first is to advise the president. Second is to run departments, all right? So, for example, the Department of Justice is one of 15 executive departments that helps run our government. The Justice Department makes sure, and they apply the law, and they make sure all the courts, all the judges, all the attorneys, everybody in the legal system are following the rules. For example, like I said, Bobby Kennedy, he was made or appointed Attorney General by JFK. He ran the Department of Justice while Kennedy was in office. Right. So for today, right, we have the Department of Health and Human Services. On slide 31, we are right now. This is huge, right? This department contains many subunits like the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, National Institutes of Health, Medicare and Medicaid, the Indian Health Service, and the Centers for Disease Control. So this department's working nonstop right now to stop this pandemic. Right? So without this department, who knows how our response toward a pandemic would be? So that's what makes the departments in our government, but also the individuals in the cabinet that run those departments, very, 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 very crucial and important to the well-being of our country. The executive office of the president, these are just more individuals that help the president do their job. And they, a lot of times, because there's so many of them, they don't work in the White House, the West Wing. They work in the, I believe this is the Eisenhower Executive Office building in DC. It's just right down the street from the White House. All right, the White House. So you have the White House staff, which we talked about. I gave that big example of how the White House staff is basically like the Newark High School staff, right? Mr. Bowman is the president. We have some vice presidents with Coram, Shoemate, and Hazelton. But we also have the people that make sure that the high school runs smoothly. We have the lunchroom staff, we have the custodial staff, we have the counselors, we have the secretaries. All those individuals help the principal and the vice principals do their job and make sure the school runs smoothly. So that's what the president has. And I want to make sure that you understand this. White House staff members, such as the press secretary that speaks for the president, tries to make what he says sound okay a lot of times, and the chief of staff, which makes his schedules every day, those individuals are picked by the president, but they do not have to be approved by Congress. The only people that have to be approved by Congress are the cabinet members because they run those departments. And Trump has fired and gone through a lot of staff members. All right, so the National Security Council. This picture right here on slide 35 is of, as you can see, Hillary Clinton looks pretty shocked. This is a picture of the National Security Room, the National Security Council, when they were trying to assassinate Osama bin Laden. This was the night that bin Laden was assassinated. And as you can see, they were all fixed to the screen and trying to figure out what was going on. They're basically watching it in real time, which is pretty crazy. But the National Security Council, because the president can't do everything, he needs experts to help him understand what to do for national security here in America, but also in basically our foreign policy, how to behave in regard to threats abroad, maybe from the Middle East or North Korea or China or something like that. So it changes from president to president, and it changes from situation to situation. If they're in the Middle East, or if they're in South America, or if they're in Asia, they might need different individuals that have expertise in those areas. The president is not an expert on everything. So they need, and they surround themselves with good advisors. A president is only as good as their advisors. That's a key right there. Once again, because the president cannot do everything and they're not an expert on everything, they have these two offices really help the president. The Office of Policy Development. Policy, we know that's another word for legislation or laws, right? Things we have to follow, regulations we have to follow. Because the president is one of his main responsibilities, legislator in chief, has to, or she has to approve or suggest new policies around the country. This office helps them, the president, create those policies and make sure they're well-rounded and make sure they will work. That is their main job. And there's a lot of people, like hundreds of people, that help the president do this because you need experts in every field. The Office of Management and Budget, we have the top financial advisors and individuals in the country in this office. These people help the president because not every president is an economic major. They need help creating that budget for the entire year. They have to make sure that the budget's going to work, that the government's going to have enough money. But the federal budget basically is all the money the federal government is going to spend throughout the year. That is on salaries, on military spending, on research and development. All of those things flow through the Office of Management and Budget. All right. Once again, those are those advisors that help the president do a good job. This is talking about some independent agencies within the government. So you have some like the Securities and Exchange Commission. This we talked, maybe it's in world history, but JFK's dad, Joseph Patrick Kennedy, was the first head of the Securities and Exchange Commission created by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This was created to regulate the stock market, basically, because of the stock market crash of 1929 that created the Great Depression. They didn't want that to happen again, so they created this. Then you have NASA. That's an independent agency. The CIA is an independent agency, which creates some issues. But they're listening to me right now, so I don't want to say anything else. Listening to all of us. But those are some independent agencies that still function within the executive has control over them, but they're also independent to a certain extent, which can create some issues with the CIA. So for this, I want you to skip, or I don't want you to skip. If you don't want to do this activity, you don't have to, but if you're interested in looking at the basically the different departments within our government, feel free. Right? You're more than welcome to do it. All right, and that's all we have. Get your little completion star when you finish the lesson tutorial. All right, people, so that was the executive branch. A lot of it, I hope most of it, was review. I hope this is a pretty easy week for you. Probably the rest of the year is going to be easy because it's just going to be review. Once again, I miss all of you dearly. It's very unfortunate, and I'm upset that I'm not going to be able to see you guys again. I'm never going to have you in class again, which is terrible because many of you were delight to have in class. But don't be strangers next year. Make sure you stop by and say hi. If you have any questions, as always, send me an email, message me on Play-Doh. All right, go to my website, watch these YouTube videos. All right, but don't just sit there with questions. Make sure you let me know if you have any questions. All right, until next time, I'm out.